what Jesus really ate, a journey through his table. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to sit at the same table as Jesus? To feel the warmth of fire at dusk, hear the laughter of his disciples, and taste the same bread that he broke with his hands? Tonight, we're not reading a story. We're stepping inside one. Because in this episode, we're going to uncover forgotten flavors of the first century, to see, smell, and understand the meals that shaped the world's most extraordinary life. Opening narration. Close your eyes for a moment. It's late afternoon in ancient Galilee. The wind carries the scent of olive trees across the hills. A small group of men gathers around a simple wooden table, dust on their sandals, laughter in their voices. At the center sits a man whose eyes carry both peace and power, Jesus of Nazareth. There's no gold, no throne, no royal banquet, only humble food, bread, fish, fruit, oil. But every item here has meaning deeper than flavor. Each bite tells a story of faith, survival, and community. Each meal reveals something sacred about the way Jesus lived, loved, and taught. For thousands of years, artists and scholars have imagined his miracles, but few have stopped to ask, what did he actually eat? How did he and his disciples find food as they walked dusty roads from village to village? What did dinner look like when the Son of God shared with fishermen, tax collectors, and the poor? To answer those questions, we'll journey back 2,000 years to the sun-bleached hills and cool lakes of ancient Palestine and explore what daily life around the table truly looked like. Setting the scene, a world before plenty. In the world of Jesus, food wasn't guaranteed. Every meal was a small victory over the desert. Rainfall was rare, and harvest depended on timing, faith, and hard labor. There were no supermarkets, no stoves, no silverware. Cooking meant survival, and every ingredient came with effort. Families baked their own bread, pressed their own olive oil, and stored dried fruits for long journeys. Food connected people to the land, to their neighbors, and to God. When Jesus shared a meal, it wasn't only about eating. It was an act of communion, a symbol of unity and equality that often challenged social rules. In a culture where who you ate would define your status, Jesus invited everyone, sinners, tax collectors, fishermen, even strangers. Around his table, everyone belonged. That simple idea that breaking bread could break barriers was radical, and it still is. Imagine the moment. Imagine sitting there, just a few feet away from him. The flames flicker, shadows dance on the stone walls. A basket of freshly baked bread passes from hand to hand. Someone pours a clay jug of wine, diluted with cool spring water. There's a soft crackle of fish roasting over coals. He looks up, smiles, and gives thanks. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who brings forth bread from the earth. And then he breaks it. That sound, the tearing of bread, was one every disciple would remember for the rest of their lives. Because in that simple gesture, they recognize him, not as a king in power, but as a friend who shared their hunger, their dust, their life. A journey through his meals. From the shores of Galilee to the upper room in Jerusalem, Jesus' meals tell the story of his mission, a story written not in ink, but in flavor, texture, and tradition. The grilled fish after the resurrection, the multiplied loaves that fed thousands, the bread broken in secret at the Last Supper. Each moment carried both nourishment and meaning. Through these meals, we can glimpse the rhythm of his days and the heart of his message. The foods of his world were simple yet profound. Freshly baked flatbread, olive oil thick and golden, figs dried under the desert sun, and the ever-present fish from the Sea of Galilee, a lifeline for countless families. Meals were shared reclining on low cushions, hands instead of utensils, praise instead of chatter. Every detail, from the shape of the bread to the order of blessing, was filled with symbolism. When he dipped bread into a common bowl, it wasn't only food, it was fellowship. And when he washed his disciples' feet, it wasn't only humility, it was revolution, the invitation. In every culture, meals unite us. They tell us who we are and who we love. And 2,000 years ago, Jesus used something as ordinary as dinner to reveal something extraordinary about heaven. He turned water into wine to keep a wedding celebration alive. He blessed a few loaves and fish to feed the hungry. He invited the outcast to sit beside him. And through it all, He showed that the table was not a place of exclusion, but of transformation. Every shared meal was a message that grace could taste like bread, and redemption could begin with a cup of wine, a personal connection. Maybe that's why his followers remembered his meals so vividly, because they weren't just eating, they were being seen, accepted, loved. When Jesus lifted his eyes and gave thanks, he wasn't just blessing the food, he was blessing the people around him. Every crumb, every sip, every smile was a glimpse of the kingdom he spoke about. Transition to the next part. So tonight, as we begin this journey together, we're not just exploring ancient recipes or forgotten customs. We're uncovering the spiritual language of food, how taste, smell, and touch became tools of divine teaching. In the next part of our story, we'll step into the most well-documented meal of all, the one that proved his resurrection was real, when Jesus appeared to his disciples and asked for something as ordinary as a piece of roasted fish. What did that moment mean? Why fish? And what hidden truth does that simple meal still hold today? Stay with me, because what happens next will forever change the way you see the table of Jesus. The meals of Jesus, what his table reveals. The fire still glows faintly on the shores of Galilee. The disciples sit in silence, waves whispering against the rocks. And then a familiar voice calls out from the mist, "Friends, have you caught any fish?" They look up, eyes widening. It's him, the teacher, the one they thought they had lost. He gestures toward the fire. Fish sizzles gently on the coals, the air rich with salt and smoke. And there, beside the warmth of dawn, the risen Christ shares breakfast with his followers. Not a feast, not a sermon, just a meal, simple, human, holy, the miracle of the ordinary. This was not the first time food became a message in his hands. All throughout his journey, Jesus used the table to teach, to heal, and to reveal. Because in his world, food was never just food. It was story. It was faith made visible. Each meal was a living parable, one that carried the rhythm of heaven into the noise of human life. To understand his message, we must begin by understanding his meals, the bread of daily life. In first-century Judea, bread wasn't a side dish. It was life itself. Every home baked it daily, kneading coarse barley flour with water, salt, and a little oil. The smell of bread was a scent of survival. When Jesus said, "I am the bread of life," he wasn't using poetic language. He was speaking the language of the poor. Because for most people, bread was the difference between hunger and hope. When he broke bread and gave thanks, it wasn't only a prayer. It was a declaration that even the simplest food, shared in faith, could become sacred. Bread symbolized more than nourishment. It was unity, one loaf divided among many, just as his love would be shared among all. And centuries later, that symbol still endures in every communion, in every breaking of bread done in remembrance of him, the fish of Galilee. Fish was the heartbeat of Galilee's economy. Men cast their nets before dawn, hoping for tilapia or sardines, the same kind Jesus and his disciples likely ate. Fish was cheap, rich in protein, and easy to preserve with salt. But in the hands of Jesus, even fish became miraculous. On a quiet hillside, thousands sat hungry and tired. With just 5 loaves and 2 fish, he fed them all. That moment wasn't about multiplying food. It was about multiplying faith. The miracle said something profound, that God sees our hunger, both physical and spiritual, and provides not through abundance, but through blessing. Even after his resurrection, we shared fish by the sea. It was as though he was reminding them, "I am still with you in the ordinary moments, even in breakfast." The olive and the vine. If bread and fish fed the body, then olive oil and wine fed the soul. The olive tree was a symbol of peace and endurance. Its oil anointed kings and healed wounds. It was used in lamps, cooking, and sacred rituals alike. When Jesus entered the Garden of Gethsemane, whose name literally means olive press, it was no coincidence. There, under the weight of sorrow, he was pressed, just like the olives that gave oil for light and healing. And the vine, the lifeblood of Israel's hills, became his metaphor for spiritual connection. "I am the vine," he said, "you are the branches." Every cup of wine at a Jewish meal reminded people of joy, covenant, and life shared. So when he lifted the cup at the Last Supper, he gave new meaning to an ancient custom, transforming it into a symbol of eternal promise. The table of outcasts. In the ancient world, dining was an act of identity. Pharisees ate only with the pure. The elite dined with the elite. But Jesus, he broke those rules again and again. He sat with tax collectors, lepers, women of low status, and sinners. He turned every table into a place of grace. Imagine the shock of the crowd when they saw him recline with people considered unworthy. To them, it looked scandalous. To him, it was salvation in motion, because in his kingdom, the guest list was open. Every meal was a declaration that love had no hierarchy. He didn't ask, "Are you good enough to sit with me?" He asked, "Are you hungry?" And those who came, hungry in body or spirit, always left filled. The Last Supper, a covenant of remembrance. On his final night, in a quiet upper room, Jesus gathered his disciples one last time. The lamps flickered, the air heavy with expectation. He took the bread, gave thanks, and broke it. Then he lifted the cup. "This is my body. This is my blood. Do this in remembrance of me." It wasn't just a farewell. It was an eternal invitation. In that moment, he redefined what a meal could mean, turning dinner into a living symbol of grace, a sacred act that would echo through centuries. Every communion table today is a doorway back to that night, to that upper room where love overcame fear, and the simple act of sharing food became the language of salvation. After the cross, the table continues. Even after his death, meals remain the setting of revelation. When two disciples walked the road to Emmaus, their hearts heavy with confusion, they didn't recognize the stranger who walked beside them, not until he broke bread. And in that familiar sound, the tearing of the loaf, their eyes were opened. That moment tells us something extraordinary. The presence of Jesus often arrives disguised in the ordinary, not in thunder, not in fire, but in bread, in hands, in quiet grace. The lesson of his table. Across his life, every meal carried a message. Feed the hungry, share with the forgotten, see the divine in the daily. Jesus never built temples or palaces. He built tables. Tables where the lonely found company, where the proud learned humility, where heaven touched the earth, not through power, but through presence. The meals of Jesus remind us that the sacred isn't locked in rituals. It's waiting in every act of kindness, every shared moment, every time we choose to sit beside another soul and call them family. Closing reflection. If you were there, if you could sit at that table tonight, what would you bring? What would you ask? What would you feel as he looked across the firelight, smiled, and broke the bread once more? Maybe he would say nothing at all. Maybe the silence would be enough. Because sometimes the truest faith is not in grand declarations, but in the quiet gratitude of being invited to the table. And perhaps that's what he wanted us to remember all along, that God still meets us, not in temples of stone, but in the breaking of bread. The hidden meanings of Jesus' table. There is something sacred about a table, not just the food upon it, but the presence that gathers around it. Every meal Jesus shared carried a message, not only for those sitting beside him 2,000 years ago, but for every soul who would one day seek him across time. Narration, the meaning behind every meal. When Jesus sat to eat, he wasn't merely satisfying hunger. He was building bridges between heaven and earth, between the sinner and the saint, between the broken and the whole. In the world of first-century Palestine, meals were more than daily routines. They were rituals of belonging. Who you dined with defined who you were. And that's why every time Jesus took his seat at the table, he was rewriting the social laws of his world. He ate with fishermen, tax collectors, and outcasts. People society had erased from its circles. To share a meal with them was to declare, "You belong. You are seen. You are loved." Each table became a stage for a silent revolution, one that didn't begin with swords or proclamations, but with bread broken in peace. Seen, the table as a symbol of the kingdom. In Jewish tradition, the table was a miniature altar. The act of breaking bread was a sacred acknowledgement that life itself came from God. So when Jesus took bread, blessed it, and gave it to his followers, he wasn't performing an ordinary gesture. He was fulfilling centuries of covenant imagery. The bread was his body, nourishment freely given. The wine, his blood, life poured out in love. And the table, that humble space of wood and clay, became a prophecy of the kingdom of heaven, a banquet without walls, where every soul has a place. Many will come from the east and the west, he said, and sit down with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. The ancient table of Palestine, low to ground and surrounded by friends reclining close, now expands across time, reaching every home, every church, every heart that calls upon his name. Reflection, the washing of the feet. But perhaps the most profound message wasn't spoken. It was performed. When Jesus knelt and washed the feet of his disciples, the world shifted. The teacher became the servant. The King of Kings, on his knees before those who would abandon him, whispered through action what words could never contain. True greatness is found in service. In that moment, he dismantled every social hierarchy. In Rome, the powerful ruled over the weak. At Jesus' table, the powerful served them. And that act, so humble, so human, became a living parable of the kingdom he preached, a place where love descends to lift, where holiness stoops to heal. Seen the olive oil of anointing and memory. Every table that time glowed with a small lamp fed by olive oil, the golden lifeblood of ancient Palestine. Families pressed it with reverence. Priests used it to anoint the sacred, and Jesus used it as a symbol of healing and divine presence. When he spoke of the wise and foolish virgins keeping their lamps lit, he was speaking about readiness, the oil of faith that keeps our souls burning in the dark. In the Good Samaritan's parable, oil again appears, poured on wounds, soothing, cleansing, saving. It was not coincidence. It was a whisper that the same substance used to light homes and heal bodies could also illuminate the path to compassion. Reflection, the meals as a mirror for our lives. Every detail of those meals still speaks to us today. The way he broke bread, simple, deliberate, grateful, reminds us that sacredness is not hidden in temples, but in moments of everyday life. When you share food with someone in need, when you forgive, when you make space at your table for the lonely, you are continuing what began in Galilee 2,000 years ago, because his table never ended. It lives on in every act of kindness, in every meal where hearts are open before mouths are fed. Seeing the Last Supper and the eternal invitation. The Last Supper wasn't just a farewell. It was an invitation that echoes through eternity. When Jesus said, "Do this in remembrance of me," he wasn't simply talking about ritual. He was calling his followers to live in remembrance, to carry forward the spirit of unity, humility, and love that was born around that table. Every time we share communion, or even a simple meal blessed with gratitude, we sit at that same divine table, one that transcends time and space. The bread still breaks. The wine still pours. The presence still lingers. Narration, the eternal table. Archaeologists can uncover stones, scrolls, and pottery, but the real legacy of Jesus' meals isn't found in artifacts. It's found in the way we live, the way we love, the way we welcome others into our lives. Because in the end, his table wasn't about food. It was about restoration. Every meal was a preview of the world to come, a world healed, forgiven, and made whole. So the next time you sit down for dinner, imagine the soft light of an olive lamp flickering nearby. Imagine the quiet laughter of friends, the breaking of warm bread, the touch of gratitude in every gesture. And remember, the kingdom begins wherever love is served. Closing, transition toward part 4. But meals were only part of the story. Beyond the table, beyond the laughter and the lessons, there was a quiet of the night, the home where he rested, the walls that sheltered his prayers, the simple spaces where divinity lived among dust and stone. In the next part of our journey, we'll step inside those homes to see where Jesus slept, where families gathered, and how ancient life in first-century Palestine reveals the heart of his humanity. Because to truly understand his message, we must first understand how he lived. Coming next, the homes of Jesus where heaven touched earth. The homes of Jesus where heaven touched earth. When night fell over Galilee, the stars unfolded like ancient witnesses. Somewhere among the olive trees and stone paths, a quiet home glowed with the faint light of an oil lamp. Inside, the air carried the warmth of bread, the sound of whispered prayer, and the presence of the one who would change the world. Before the miracles, before the crowds. Jesus lived as a man, breathing, eating, sleeping beneath the same roofs as his people. And in those homes, we find not only history, but humanity. Scene 1, the world he called home. Archaeology tells us that homes in first-century Nazareth were humble, single-room dwellings carved partly into rock, with walls of limestone and roofs woven from timber and reeds. Families shared these spaces with their animals at night for warmth. The floor was earth. The light came from a single clay lamp. It was here, in the stillness of such simplicity, that the Son of God grew up. No marble halls, no royal chambers, only the quiet hum of daily life. The sound of grinding grain, of a mother's voice in prayer, of wood and stone meeting under Joseph's hands. The divine entered humanity not through palaces, but through poverty. Reflection, what makes a home sacred? A home is not sacred because of its beauty, but because of the love that dwells within. When Jesus walked into a house, it became a temple, not because of architecture, but because of his presence. He sat on clay floors, touched weathered walls, and blessed what was ordinary until it became eternal. Every small space he entered turned into a sanctuary. And even today, when faith fills a room, no matter how small, he still turns it into a home where heaven touches earth. Scene 2, inside the homes of Nazareth and Capernaum. In Nazareth, his early home stood among narrow terraces of stone. The living area and the place of rest were one. A mat was spread at night and rolled away each morning. Every sunrise began with prayer. Every evening ended with gratitude. Later, in Capernaum, Jesus often stayed at the home of Peter, a modest fisherman's house built around a central courtyard. Archaeologists discovered its ruins beneath an octagonal church, with inscriptions that call it the house of the Lord. Here, miracles happened not in temples, but in kitchens. The sick were healed beside water jars. The paralyzed stood beside the hearth. Divine power flowed quietly, like sunlight spilling through a window. The ordinary became holy, not because heaven came down, but because heaven was already there. Scene 3, the household as the first church. Before the grand basilicas, before the cathedrals, the first church was a home. In the homes of believers, bread was broken, prayers were whispered, and hearts were changed. It was around simple tables that faith began to spread. From one house to another, from family to neighbor, from village to village. Jesus himself said, "Where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, that I am among them." And so the earliest Christian gatherings were echoes of his life. Meals, prayers, stories shared by firelight. The architecture of faith was built not with stone, but with presence. Reflection, the rhythm of ancient life. Imagine the rhythm of those days. Morning light slipping through a small window, a mother grinding wheat, children fetching water from the cistern, Joseph's tools resting in a corner, still marked with sawdust, and Jesus, young, quiet, learning to work with his hands, shaping wood that would one day hold the weight of the world. The simplicity of that life was its holiness. There was no separation between the sacred and the mundane. Every act, cooking, cleaning, working, became a form of worship. It was in this silence that the Savior of mankind learned the music of the world. Scene 4, the guest within the home. Whenever Jesus entered someone's home, whether it was Martha and Mary's in Bethany or a tax collector's house in Jericho, he brought transformation. Martha learned to pause. Mary learned to listen. Zacchaeus learned to give. And every wall that once separated sinner from saint, rich from poor, crumbled in the warmth of that shared presence. Each home he entered became a living parable, that no house is too unworthy for grace to dwell within it. Scene 5, the sacred space within us. But his journey didn't end in stone houses. He came to build a greater dwelling, not made by hands, but by hearts. My Father and I will make our home within you. These words reveal the final truth, that the true temple, the true home of God, is the human soul itself. Every act of love lays another brick. Every moment of prayer kindles another lamp, until our hearts, too, become the home where heaven touches earth. Closing. Transition toward part 5. As the stars fade over Galilee and the olive lamps flicker out, the story of his earthly homes comes to rest. But the journey does not end. For the next part of our pilgrimage will take us beyond walls, to the roads he walked, the paths that led from village to village, where every footprint carried a message of mercy. Coming next, the roads of Galilee, the path of miracles. The roads of Galilee, the path of miracles. The sun rose gently over the hills of Galilee, casting long ribbons of light across the fields where silence was as ancient as the stones themselves. The air was cool, touched by the scent of olive leaves and the salt carried inland from the Sea of Galilee. Along those narrow paths, worn smooth by centuries of sandals, Jesus walked, not as a conqueror, but as one who carried within him the quiet authority of heaven. Every step he took stirred the dust of history. Every breath he drew seemed to awaken something eternal hidden in the hearts of those who crossed his path. The roads of Galilee were not merely paths between towns. They were arteries of faith, where stories began and destinies converged. Farmers, fishermen, mothers, children, beggars, soldiers, all walked those same roads. And somewhere along them, heaven met the earth in simple, unremarkable moments that became miracles. There were mornings when he would pass through the lakeside villages, where the smell of drying nets and roasting fish filled the air. The fishermen, weary from a night's labor, would pull their boats to shore and find him waiting, not with sermons of thunder, but with eyes that carried the calm of deep waters. They would listen as he spoke of the kingdom of God, and though they did not yet understand, something in his voice called them beyond the nets, beyond the sea, beyond the life they knew. Those who followed him did not walk along marble streets or beneath carved arches. They walked through dust, heat, and hunger, across valleys where the soil cracked beneath the sun. Yet on those same paths, blind men opened their eyes, lepers felt the wind on skin once dead, and broken souls learned to stand again. Galilee was not rich, yet it overflowed with life. Its hills were terraced with olive trees that shimmered silver in the morning light. Flocks grazed near the ancient wells, and the cries of shepherds echoed across the ravines. It was here that Jesus revealed the sacred hidden in the ordinary, the divine within daily bread, the eternal within human sorrow. One evening, as twilight spread its violet veil over the land, he stopped by the roadside where a group of children played near a fig tree. Their laughter echoed against the stones, bright and innocent. Jesus knelt, smiled, and watched a small boy offer him a piece of bread, rough, coarse, and still warm from a village oven. He took it, blessed it quietly, and broke it into pieces. The children gathered close, their eyes wide, their hearts unguarded. That moment, though unseen by history, held the same grace as the feeding of 5,000. For wherever he broke bread, heaven drew near. Traveling those roads was not easy. Dust clung to the feet, thirst burned the throat, and every village had its own scent of poverty and survival. Yet Jesus never walked hurriedly. He moved with the rhythm of eternity, unshaken by time, unbound by distance. To walk beside him was to learn that the journey itself was sacred, that each encounter carried meaning, that every stranger could become a revelation. As he traveled, the people whispered his name in marketplaces, on the docks, in the shadow of synagogues. Some feared him, others followed from a distance, curious yet cautious. He spoke in parables, stories born from the soil and the sea, seeds falling on good ground, fishermen drawing nets full of life, a lamp hidden under a bushel. These were not lessons of intellect but the heart, drawn from the rhythm of Galilee itself. There were days when he would withdraw from the crowds and ascend the hills alone. From there he could see the sea shimmering like a mirror, the villages scattered like pearls along its shores. The wind from the lake would rise, carrying the murmurs of distant prayers. And there in solitude he prayed, not as one reciting ritual, but as a son speaking to his father, his words dissolving into the wind. It was on one of these roads that he met the centurion, a man of Rome, powerful yet desperate. His servant lay dying, and no medicine could save him. The centurion approached with humility rare among soldiers. "Lord," he said, "I am not worthy that you should enter under my roof. Only say the word, and my servant will be healed." Jesus looked upon him, not seeing a Roman, but a man of faith. "Truly," he said, "I have not found such faith in all Israel." And from that moment, the servant was healed. Proof that faith, not heritage, opens the gates of heaven. Each miracle along those roads carried a secret rhythm, not a spectacle, but a compassion. When he healed, he touched not only the body but the unseen wounds of the soul. When he spoke, his words were seeds planted in the barren fields of despair. And when he looked upon the weary and forgotten, he saw not sinners or outcasts, but children of God, waiting to be reminded of their worth. As he journeyed toward Capernaum, the heart of his ministry, the land seemed to listen. Waves of grain bent softly as if in reverence, and even the wind hushed when he spoke. The people gathered, not out of curiosity alone, but because they sensed that in his presence, time itself paused. He taught beside the lake, where water reflected both sky and soul. And there on the shore, he called fishermen by name, Simon, Andrew, James, John, and the world changed forever. The roads of Galilee were witnesses. They remembered the footprints of Messiah, the laughter of children he blessed, the tears of women who found hope where there had been none. They remembered the silence after each miracle, when all fell upon the crowd like evening dew. Yet not all who walked with him understood. Some followed for bread, others for wonder. But those who truly listened heard something deeper, the call to walk a road not paved with stones, but with surrender, a road leading not only through Galilee, but toward the hill that awaited in Jerusalem. Night often found him seated by a fire, surrounded by his disciples. They spoke little, their faces dimly lit by the glow of embers. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked and the lake shimmered under the stars. In those quiet hours, he would speak of the kingdom again, not as a distant realm, but as a reality breaking into the world through love, humility, and forgiveness. The disciples did not yet grasp the full meaning, but they felt it, the weight of eternity pressing gently upon their hearts. The roads they had walked, once ordinary, had become holy, for holiness was no longer confined to temples or altars. It lived in the dust beneath their feet, in the act of walking beside the divine made flesh. As dawn returned, the journey continued. More villages, more faces, more hearts waiting to be healed. The path ahead wound toward destiny, though none yet saw the cross rising faintly on the horizon. Galilee's roads would fade behind them, but their dust would cling to their feet forever, a silent reminder that they had once walked with the Son of God. And so the story moves forward, from the shores of Galilee toward the gates of Jerusalem, from the path of miracles to the road of sacrifice. But before the shadows fall, let us pause once more upon these roads, where heaven once walked among men. For every stone remembers his step, every breeze still carries his voice, and every heart that listens closely can still hear it.